condition called CTE is beginning to make its way into the public consciousness. It's the clearest evidence yet of brain damage that's linked to depression, memory loss, anger problems, early dementia, and even death. But the lawsuits don't fault the league necessarily for a lack of action on the issue. In fact, the NFL is accused of researching the long-term effects of concussions, but then covering up the results to protect its bottom line. That's a claim the league vehemently denies. So what's next? Could these legal challenges change the game forever? And is that necessarily a bad thing? Bloomberg Businessweek's latest cover story is called Crunch Time. It's on newsstands right now, and Paul Barrett is the author. He's the magazine's assistant managing editor. Paul, welcome.
Thanks.
You write in here that the very future of football is at stake here, and I'll quote you. You say that if science one day determines that merely playing serious tackle football substantially increases the danger of debilitating brain disease as smoking makes lung cancer more likely, it's conceivable that the NFL could go the way of professional boxing. That sounds pretty dire.
Yeah. Well, that's the fear. The science isn't quite there yet, but we do know that this repetitive jostling of the brain, where the gray matter bangs into the skull, seems to be causing long-term problems with a lot of NFL players, ex-NFL players.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that it was brain injuries that damaged boxing as much as pay-per-view killed boxing, but let's keep going on the medical problems and some of the legal problems. Football has several issues: a culture of accepted risk, a world of non-guaranteed contracts where you got to get back out there or somebody else will take your job. But I think key to the legal situation here is, did the NFL give these guys the wrong information? And I think there is some evidence that they may have done that. There's a 2007 NFL pamphlet that they gave to players saying research with professional athletes has not shown that having more than one or two concussions leads to permanent problems. Roger Goodell read this pamphlet to NFL players in 2009, and of course they sort of focused the study on active players rather than retired players who would have shown much more CTE. Do you think that there is a real basis to this lawsuit where the NFL will be in trouble for having given players the wrong information?
There's a real threat here. It's not just a question of giving players the wrong information. It's a question of whether the NFL actively covered up what they knew. If they did something akin to what the building materials industry did with asbestos or the tobacco industry did with cigarettes. And that's the question. It hasn't been proved yet, but I think it's seen as being plausible. And that's why I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the NFL to settle the litigation, set aside some billions of dollars to deal with ex-players in the future, and try to move ahead and get ahead of this potential crisis.
And Paul, this wasn't a concussion, but I was reminded of Redskins rookie quarterback RG3. He had a knee injury. He continued to play in the playoffs, re-injured it, and there was a question of whether he should have been allowed to continue in the game. And the justification basically was that he really wanted to play, and so he was allowed to make that decision. Is it fair to put that responsibility on the players to decide for themselves that they should be going back in the game?
Right. Well, that wasn't, as you said, a brain situation, but I think it's very relevant because it shows that the culture of staying in at all costs, of being the hero, is still very prevalent in the NFL. And I think any adult, let alone medical professional, would say it should not be up to the 23-year-old pumped up on adrenaline to decide whether he gets to stay in the game and be the hero, that a doctor should be making that decision. I think that controversial decision to leave RG3 in is something that will bear on how this whole thing gets sorted out.
Well, Paul, I wonder if there are any steps that can be taken in terms of tweaking the game or changing the game a little bit that could, protect the players a little better. I mean, one thing that I jumped out at me, Lou Holtz, the old Notre Dame coach and coach of 9 other teams, he said, take the face guards off the helmets. That way, players can't lunge headfirst to use the helmet as a battering ram. He said players would go back to the fundamentals of tackling, no more concussions. I don't know how that sounds to you. I wonder if that or if there's any other steps out there that maybe the NFL and college should be considering.
Well, that's a fascinating proposal. I was just spending time with a college roommate over the weekend who happens to be a high school football coach. He said the exact same thing. If we took the face guards off, you'd have a few more broken noses and a lot fewer concussions. Yikes. The safeguard of a face guard has this kind of paradoxical effect of turning the head into a weapon. The NFL, though, is already changing the rules. I mean, the placement of the kickoff has changed. There are more aggressive penalties being called. So the NFL really does have the religion now, and it's a question of whether they can resolve this body of claims by the 4,000 former players, set those aside, deal with them in a straight-up way, and then move ahead to try to make the game safer.
Paul Barrett, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
President Obama also weighed in on the